Dear students, in the previous session we discussed about the origin and context of comparative public administration, and also we discussed about why we need to do comparison among different administrative systems established across different countries in the world. Now, we will discuss about to understand the comparative public administration in a better way. It is very important for students to understand about different societies that were proposed by F.W. Rix, and also key important concepts in relation to comparative public administration. Students, remember that when it comes to any theory, any concept, it is important to understand the typology of the theory and concepts. Then only we will be able to effectively understand what do you mean by the concept. So, we will move on to the what we call two types of societies, which are actually proposed by Frederick Rix. Societies, according to Rix, is categorized into different types. He called it as agraria and industria. In fact, what do you mean by agraria? Agraria is nothing but a traditional agricultural society. In other words, a typical village model that we can compare with Indian context. A society dominated by the agricultural activities. In other words, most of the source of the income you will find in an area which is result from the agrarian activities. That society can be called as agraria according to Rix. And status is determined by the birth. In other words, in a society, individuals and their identity and respect and their status is completely determined by the birth. And the birth means, when we use the word birth, birth means identity is related to birth. Okay. And also along with that, one institution, you will find one of the important characteristics in relation to agraria is one institution will try to perform many roles. Instead of confining to one particular role, institutions will perform multiple roles. That is another important characteristics of what we call agraria. And when it comes to stratification system driven by tradition. So, the systems established in the agrarian society are driven by tradition, are completely controlled by the tradition. So, three important aspects that now we studied as part of agrarian society. One is the identity of the individual is deeply rooted with their birth. Second important thing is institutions perform multiple roles instead of confining to one particular. Third important thing is stratification system driven by tradition. In other words, as institutions perform according to the tradition, not according to the rules and regulations. So, to understand in a better way, we can refer what we call imperial China as a illustrative example in this context. Not only China, if you go to our own Indian villages, you will find these kind of characteristics where the individuals are identified with their birth. It can be caste, it can be class or anything. When it comes to the institutions also, if you look at the villages, you will find the government offices, you will find the schools, you will find the government teachers. They are into playing multiple roles at village level. So, this can be called as what we call agrarian society. So, according to Rix, a society which is identified with the birth in terms of individuals, a society in which agencies are performing multiple tasks are called agrarian society. So, examples has already mentioned as like China, and villages, typical villages in Indian context also can be reported as the agrarian societies. Another important type of society is industria. According to Rix, industria means the modern industrial society, wherein industria sits at the opposite pole to the agrarian society. In other words, completely contrasting characteristics you will find compared with the agrarian society. It is marked by universalistic norms, achievement based status and high social and geographical mobility. So, these indicators completely goes against what we call the agrarian society, whereas individuals are identified based on their performance, based on their efficiency, based on purely their talent. When it comes to another important aspect is the mobility aspect. Individuals in a society feel very comfortable in terms of moving from one place to another place or leaving their own place to another place. That is what we call geographic mobility. Mobility, wherever, remember students, wherever mobility levels of the individuals are very high, the society will grow very fast, because through mobility only adaptability, learning will happen. Another important aspect in relation to industry is roles are clearly defined, efficiency becomes the dominant value. What does it mean? It means that administrative agencies working in the industry are confined to their roles. Means no agency in industria will try to perform the functions of other agency. So, they are mindful about, administrative agencies are very much mindful about their own roles, their own scope and functions of their responsibilities. Along with that, efficiency becomes the dominating value. What does it mean? It means that efficiency of the employees, efficiency of the government, efficiency of the administrative agencies play predominant role, and in other words, identity of any individual, identity of any administrative agency is determined by the efficiency and performance. Examples are contemporary United States can be referred as an example to understand. So, why people dream to go to America, why they dream to settle down in America? One of the reasons is America is nothing but a dreamer's world. What does it mean? It is not just about dreaming, it is also about functioning of the dreams. Means they will try to materialize, they will try to experience what they dreamt for. In other words, United States is a society or a platform that provides to the individuals an extensive liberty to convert their views into activities. That is one of the reasons United States of America is identified as the fastest growing society. So, United States of America can be referred as the industria. Another important aspect of this topic is key concepts in comparative public administration. So, when you talk about the key concepts in comparative public administration, what does it mean? What is the role of key concepts in understanding about comparative public administration? So, before we compare our administrative system with another country's administrative, let us say America, let us say United Nations, United States of America or the UK, we need to understand about the concepts very clearly. So, once the concepts are very clear, it is very easy for us to do a comparison among different administrative systems. First concept is ecology of administration. So, the highlighting point here is ecology. What do you mean by ecology? Ecology is nothing but what we call the environment in a simple terms. Riggs emphasized that administration cannot be studied in an isolation way. So, no administration will work in an isolated way. How do you understand that? In a simple way, we need to understand that environment has its own impact on the administration. In return, administration do has its own impact on what we call the environment. So, both either the environment or the administration tries to influence each other, but ultimately ecology of administration argues that administration is to a great extent is influenced by the ecology, in other words the environment. Administrative decisions, administrative policies, administrative behavior is completely controlled or influenced by the environment in which the administration is located. So, the moment we are talking about the ecology of administration, we are recognizing the fact that administration is not alone, it is not just about the building, but it is the agency which is in which it is surrounded by, that is called the ecology. So, this ecological approach was a major departure from what we call structural approach or structural studies. So, when you look at the traditional public administration, it talks only about the administration and within the administration. It won't talk anything about where the administration is located, and it won't recognize that there is an environment in which the administration is located. But when it comes to the ecological approach, it departs from that traditional or what you call structural approach and tries to accept the fact that ecology is a bigger factor in which what we call public administration is located. And when you talk about the environment, what do you mean by that? When we are talking about the environment, we are talking about the society. When we are talking about the culture, we are talking about the customs, we are talking about the norms, we are talking about the economy, we are also talking about, more importantly, political context. As I discussed in the previous session, that political context is very important because that determines, that structures the administrative behavior. That is very important. So, administrative behavior, though we call it as a concept, but which is the result of fundamentally social, cultural, economic and political aspects. So, administration behavior cannot be viewed in an isolated way, but it needs to be understood that administrative behavior is the result of the environment in which it is located. So, another important concept is prismatic society. What do you mean by prismatic society? According to Riggs, he developed his a famous prismatic model, what he calls society as a platform or what we call prism. What do you mean by that? When white light passes through it, the light diffracts into multiple colors. Similarly, when it comes to the society, when you enter into society, you will find multiple dimensions of the society. So, a modernizing society is neither fully traditional nor fully modern. According to Ricks, you will not find any society which is in an absolute sense. What do you mean by that? Absolute means you cannot see any society which is in a static mode. What do you mean by static mode? With a mode which has no change. But according to Ricks, every society is moving from one phase to another phase, one level to another level, one context to another context. So, here the more important thing when it comes to prismatic society is societies will keep on changing from one level to another level. So, in prismatic societies, administrative structure may look modern on paper, but in reality or in a functional mode, it behaves very traditional. So, for example, if you look at the bureaucracy, which is what you call the civil services recruitment exam, may exist. On papers, it sounds great in terms of notification, in terms of conducting exam, in terms of conducting interviews. But in the interviews, you will find what we call nepotism or caste considerations still influence the appointments. So, with this, we will conclude the session.